The cemetery was unusually quiet that morning, wrapped in a thin gray mist that clung to the marble headstones like unfinished grief. Daniel Whitmore stood in front of a polished black grave, his expensive coat doing nothing to protect him from the cold settling in his chest. It had been 3 years since his wife Eleanor had passed away, yet the pain felt no older than yesterday. As one of the wealthiest men in the city, Daniel owned companies, skyscrapers, and influence, but none of it could buy back the woman who had once held his hand through every rise and fall of his life. He visited her grave every month without fail, always alone, always silent. Today was no different, until something unexpected caught his attention. A few rows away, near an older, simpler headstone, a young waitress knelt on the damp ground. She wore a faded diner uniform beneath a thin jacket, her shoulders shaking as quiet sobs escaped her. She wasn't crying loudly or seeking attention. This was the kind of pain that had no audience, the kind that lived deep inside. Daniel noticed how she wiped her tears quickly whenever footsteps passed, as if ashamed of her grief. Something about her loneliness stirred something buried within him. Eleanor had once been the same way, soft, unseen, kind to a world that rarely returned the favor. Daniel found himself watching the waitress longer than he should have, not with curiosity, but with recognition. He didn't yet know her name, her story, or why she was there, but he felt it. This moment was not a coincidence. And for the first time since Eleanor's death, Daniel sensed that fate was quietly pulling him toward a path he never expected. Daniel tried to look away. He told himself it wasn't his place, that grief was private, and he had no right to intrude on another person's sorrow. Yet his feet refused to move. The waitress, he assumed she was a waitress from the worn uniform peeking out beneath her coat, rose shakily from the ground, brushing dirt from her knees with trembling hands. Her face was pale, her eyes red and swollen, the kind of exhaustion that came from crying long before today. She stood there for a moment, staring at the name etched into the modest headstone, as if afraid that if she looked away, she might lose the last piece of that person forever. Daniel watched her press her forehead gently against the cold stone, whispering something he couldn't hear, a goodbye, or maybe an apology. He recognized that posture immediately. He had done the same thing at Eleanor's grave countless times, whispering words that arrived too late. As the woman turned to leave, a sudden gust of wind knocked over the small bouquet she had placed at the grave. Cheap flowers, carefully tied with a string, nothing like the elaborate arrangements Daniel's assistant ordered each month. The flowers scattered across the damp grass, petals bruising underfoot. Without thinking, Daniel stepped forward. He bent down slowly, his expensive shoes sinking slightly into the earth as he gathered the fallen flowers in his hands. The waitress froze when she noticed him, her eyes widening with shock as she realized she wasn't alone. For a split second, fear flashed across her face, the instinct of someone used to being judged, dismissed, or blamed. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, her voice hoarse, already reaching for the flowers as if she expected him to scold her for the disruption. "I didn't mean to. I was just leaving." Daniel handed the bouquet back to her gently, careful not to crush the fragile stems. "It's all right," he said softly, his voice surprisingly unsteady. "The wind here? It does that." She nodded, clutching the flowers to her chest like a shield. Up close, Daniel could see how young she really was, though life had clearly aged her beyond her years. There were faint calluses on her hands, the marks of long shifts and little rest. Her eyes flickered briefly toward Eleanor's grave, then back to him, confusion mixing with hesitation. "You come here often?" Daniel asked, immediately regretting the question. It sounded intrusive, hollow. But she hesitated, then nodded. "When I can," she replied quietly. "Before work, usually. It's the only place that still feels honest." The words struck him harder than he expected. Honest. That was exactly how Eleanor had once described cemeteries. No lies, no pretending, just truth and loss. Daniel swallowed, glancing back at his wife's grave. She used to say the same thing, he admitted, surprising himself. The waitress followed his gaze, her expression softening as she noticed the name, the dates, the polished stone that marked a life well-loved and deeply mourned. "I'm sorry," she said again, this time more gently. Not out of fear, but understanding. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was heavy, shared, the kind that only existed between two strangers, bound by the same ache. Daniel realized then that he didn't feel like a billionaire standing beside a waitress. He felt like a widower standing beside another broken soul. And in that quiet space between graves, something invisible shifted, something that would soon change both of their lives in ways neither of them could yet imagine. The waitress hesitated, as if unsure whether she was allowed to remain in that space with him. Then, slowly, she knelt again and carefully set the flowers back where they belonged. Daniel watched her movements, gentle, deliberate, almost reverent. She adjusted the ribbon around the stems, straightened the small photo frame leaning against the stone, and wiped away a smudge of dirt with her sleeve. It wasn't the behavior of someone passing through, it was the devotion of someone who carried this grief with her every day. When she finally stood, she exhaled deeply, like she had been holding her breath for years. "My name is Lily," she said at last, her voice barely above a whisper. "I work at the cafe across the street. The one that opens at 6. Daniel nodded slowly. He knew the place. He passed it every morning without ever seeing it. "Daniel," he replied. For once he didn't add his last name. He didn't want the weight of it to change how she looked at him. Lily studied his face for a moment, as if deciding whether to trust him. Then she spoke again. "She was kind to me, your wife, when no one else was." Daniel felt his chest tighten. "You knew Eleanor?" The name sounded foreign in his mouth, like something sacred. Lily nodded. Not for long, just enough. She told him how, 3 years earlier, Eleanor had wandered into the cafe one rainy morning, soaked and frustrated, snapping at everyone until she noticed Lily crying quietly behind the counter. How Eleanor had stayed long after her coffee went cold, listening without judgment, as Lily spoke about her sick mother, the bills piling up, the nights she slept in her car because she had nowhere else to go. "She didn't give me money," Lily said quickly, as if defending Eleanor's honor. "She gave me time. She told me I mattered." Daniel closed his eyes. That was Eleanor, fierce, impatient with the world, but endlessly gentle with people who were hurting. Lily continued, her voice trembling. "When my mother died last year, I didn't know where else to go. I came here because—" This is where she felt close. She gestured to the grave. "I never thought I'd meet you." Her gaze dropped to the ground. "I hope it's not disrespectful." "No," Daniel said immediately. "It isn't." His voice broke, and he didn't try to hide it. She would have wanted this. They stood in silence again, but it felt different now. He wasn't alone with his grief anymore. It was shared, layered, understood. Daniel realized that Lily knew a side of Eleanor he hadn't seen in years, the side that gave quietly, loved fiercely, and never asked for recognition. As Lily checked her watch and sighed, reality crept back in. "I should go. I'll be late for my shift." She turned to leave, then paused. "Thank you for picking up the flowers." Daniel watched her walk away, her shoulders slightly hunched, carrying a grief as heavy as his own, just without the protection of wealth or power. As she disappeared down the path, Daniel felt something stir inside him. Not pity, not charity, but purpose. For the first time since Eleanor's death, he felt like she was still guiding him. And he knew, deep down, that this meeting wasn't an accident. It was a beginning. Daniel didn't go straight home after leaving the cemetery. Instead, he found himself sitting in his car across the street from the small cafe Lily had mentioned. It was nothing like the places he usually visited. No glass walls, no valet parking, no polished steel, just a faded sign, steamed-up windows, and the quiet hum of ordinary life. For reasons he didn't fully understand, he waited. And when Lily finally stepped inside, tying her apron as she walked, something in his chest eased. She was real. This wasn't grief playing tricks on him. Over the next few weeks, Daniel began coming to the cafe, always early, always sitting at the same corner table. He dressed down, traded his tailored coats for simple jackets, and paid in cash. Lily noticed him on the third visit. She didn't say anything at first, just offered him coffee with a small, uncertain smile. But slowly, conversations grew. At first, it was about nothing: weather, customers, the burnt toast the cafe owner never seemed to fix. Then, little by little, the cracks opened. Lily spoke about her mother, the nights she still woke up reaching for her phone to call her. Daniel spoke about Eleanor, about how the house felt too large, too silent. Neither of them mentioned money. Neither of them needed to. One evening, Daniel overheard something that changed everything. Lily was in the back room, arguing in hushed tones with her manager. "I already work double shifts," she pleaded. "Please, I just need 2 more weeks." The reply was sharp, dismissive. "If you can't keep up, I'll find someone who can." When Lily emerged, her eyes were red, her hands shaking as she served his coffee. Daniel felt anger rise, hot and unfamiliar. He had crushed companies for less. But this time, he did nothing. Not yet. He needed to understand. A few days later, Lily didn't show up. The cafe was open, but her corner was empty. Daniel asked the owner casually, and the answer hit him like a blow. She quit. Couldn't afford to keep coming in late. Some people just aren't built for pressure. Daniel left without finishing his coffee. That night, he stood alone in Eleanor's study, surrounded by awards, photos, and memories. He finally understood what Eleanor had tried to teach him for years. Power meant nothing if it never touched the ground. The next morning, Daniel went back to the cafe, but not as a customer. He bought the building, quietly, legally, without headlines. He kept the owner on, kept the staff, and reopened Lily's position, this time with flexible hours and paid leave. When Lily received the call, she thought it was a mistake. When she came in and saw Daniel standing there, she froze. "You?" she whispered. Daniel nodded. "You mattered to Eleanor," he said softly. "That means you matter to me." Tears streamed down Lily's face, but she didn't thank him right away. Instead, she said something that stopped him cold. "She once told me that one day you'd remember who you were." Daniel swallowed hard. In that moment, he realized this wasn't about saving Lily. It was about honoring Eleanor. And as Lily stepped back behind the counter, standing taller than he'd ever seen her, Daniel felt something he hadn't felt since his wife's last breath: hope. The cafe changed slowly, almost quietly, the way real healing does. There were no grand reopenings, no announcements, no press. But the atmosphere softened. The staff smiled more. The owner stopped watching the clock like it was a weapon. And Lily began to breathe again. For the first time since her mother's funeral, she stopped feeling like the ground beneath her feet might disappear at any moment. Daniel kept his distance at first. He didn't sit at his old corner table anymore. Instead, he worked from the small office upstairs, reviewing contracts, answering emails, doing what he'd always done, only now with intention. Sometimes, through the thin walls, he could hear Lily laughing with a customer or humming while she wiped the counter. Each sound felt like proof that Eleanor's kindness hadn't died with her. It had simply been waiting. One evening, after closing, Lily climbed the stairs and knocked on Daniel's door. She held a small, folded piece of paper in her hands. "I didn't know how to say this before," she said, her voice steady but soft, "so I wrote it down. The note was Eleanor's handwriting. Lily explained how her mother had once fallen behind on rent, how Eleanor had paid it without being asked, without ever returning for praise. She said real generosity, Lily read, is helping someone without making them feel small. Daniel had to sit down. The words felt like Eleanor speaking directly to him. From that night on, something shifted between them, not into romance, but into purpose. Daniel began funding small scholarships in Eleanor's name, not through foundations, but quietly through community centers and cafes like this one. Lily helped him find the people who would never ask for help, the ones Eleanor had always seen. Together, they built something invisible but powerful, a network of second chances. Months later, on the anniversary of Eleanor's death, Daniel and Lily returned to the cemetery. This time, Lily didn't stand back. She knelt beside the grave and placed fresh flowers down. Daniel watched her and realized something profound. Grief didn't vanish. It transformed. Where pain once lived alone, meaning had taken its place. Daniel finally spoke aloud, not to Lily, but to Eleanor. "I remember now," he whispered. "I promise I won't forget again." As they walked away, the sun broke through the clouds, warming the cold stone behind them. Daniel didn't look back. For the first time in years, he didn't need to. He had learned what Eleanor had always known, that real wealth isn't measured in billions, but in the lives you lift when no one is watching. And somewhere between a quiet grave and a humble cafe, Daniel Ashford finally found his way home.